At 52, I thought I had everything figured out. I had built a company from the ground up, drove a Tesla before most people even knew what it was, and closed deals in glass towers overlooking Manhattan. My son's bedroom looked like an Apple store, the latest iPad, MacBook, noise-canceling headphones. Every year on his birthday, I handed him another box and watched him force a smile. Then one day, while handing him the newest iPad Pro, he didn't unwrap it. He just looked at me and asked, "Dad, do you even know the name of my homeroom teacher?" That question knocked the wind out of me. I stood there in a tailored suit worth more than most people's monthly rent, and I couldn't answer my own child. I could tell you the quarterly revenue forecast for 5 product lines. I could recite every line of our latest investor pitch, but I had no clue which grade my son was in. And then came the real punch. I got a call from my wife. They tried to reach you. He got into a fight. He's been suspended. The school's been trying for hours. I looked at my phone, 10 missed calls, all ignored in favor of a boardroom PowerPoint. That night I realized something unforgivable. I wasn't just absent. I was a stranger wearing the title of Dad. And I was running out of time to fix that. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 52 years old, and if you'd asked anyone 10 years ago, they would have told you I was living the American dream. But the truth began much further back on a cracked sidewalk outside a 2-bedroom rental in Mobile, Alabama. My father was a drinker, the kind who started yelling by noon and passed out cold by 6. My mother raised 4 of us on tips from a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and hopelessness. We lived off boxed cereal, expired canned goods, and quiet desperation. I swore I'd never live like that. I swore I'd escape. In college, I studied finance like it was my salvation. I took on double credits, worked nights at a gas station, and lived off ramen. That's where I met Julia. She was pre-law, sharp-tongued, and soft-eyed, and she didn't take crap from anyone, not even me. We met at a university seminar on economic inequality. We were both sitting in the back, nodding, not because the speaker was convincing, but because we knew what poverty felt like. Afterward, we talked for hours on the lawn. About childhoods we were running from, futures we were running toward. We made a pact that night we would build something better together. We married young, just out of grad school. I still remember the day we exchanged vows under the oak tree in her mother's backyard. It was small, simple, honest. I didn't have much to offer, no money, no title, no promise of success. But I did have a dream and her hand in mine. I told her on camera in front of everyone we loved, "If I ever have to choose between the world and you, I'll choose you." Every single time. The video's still somewhere in our home. She played it again years later, but I'll get to that. Right after the honeymoon, I landed my first real job at a mid-size investment firm in Houston. I was a junior analyst eager to prove myself. I worked late, brought reports home, studied the market, like it held the answers to every problem we ever had growing up. Julia supported me even when she was still in law school, pulling all-nighters of her own. We were broke, but hopeful. When Julia got pregnant with our son Ethan, we cried. Not because we were scared, but because we finally had a chance to give someone the life we never got. I remember whispering into her belly, "You'll never know what it's like to feel small." For a while we kept balance. I cooked breakfast on Saturdays, changed diapers at 2 a.m., and raced home for bath time. We shared everything. Ethan's first word was "Dada," and I was there to hear it. But as promotions came and paychecks grew, so did my hours. The demands weren't sudden, they crept in like fog. First it was a business trip during his first birthday, then a missed parent seminar. Then Julia said, "Don't worry, we understand," and I believed her. The justification was always the same: I'm doing this for us. I used to hold Ethan and tell him Daddy's working hard, So you can go to college, so you can have choices. He didn't understand. He just wanted me to stay. Still, I thought I was winning. We bought a house in a good neighborhood. I traded in the used Toyota for a new Audi. I got invited to speak at panels, shake hands with CEOs. People called me self-made. What they didn't see was Julia sitting alone in the audience while I was on stage. They didn't see Ethan clapping because others were clapping, not because he understood what I did. But in those early years, we still believed in the dream. Julia kept me grounded, reminded me to breathe. She never nagged. She just waited. Looking back, I think the beginning of the end wasn't one single moment. It was 1,000 little ones I brushed past because I was chasing something bigger. But in that first chapter, when we were two broke kids with a newborn and a borrowed crib, I truly thought love and ambition could walk hand in hand. I truly believed I could win at both. I didn't know then that I was already starting to lose. The first big deal came when Ethan was 6 months old. A college buddy and I launched a fintech startup out of a co-working space with mismatched chairs and terrible Wi-Fi. We had no clients, no capital, and no clue what we were doing. But we had fire, the kind you only get when you're too young to be afraid and too broke to back out. 3 months in, we landed our first investment. 6 months later, we signed a regional bank. Suddenly, I was CEO instead of analyst. And instead of tucking Ethan in, I was redlining contracts at midnight and sleeping with my phone under my pillow. The company took off faster than we imagined. I was flying to New York, then Chicago, then San Francisco. Julia was always supportive. Do what you need to do, we'll be fine. And I believed her. I wanted to believe that love could be paused and resumed at will. Ethan's first birthday was the first crack. I was in Seattle finalizing a pitch to investors who could double our runway. I sent a gift ahead of time, a mini electric car, bright red with leather seats. On the day I FaceTimed in while Julia lit the candle, Ethan smashed cake all over his face, giggled into the camera. I smiled, made silly faces, promised. Next year, big party. I'll be there in person. I swear. He waved at the screen like I was a cartoon. I told myself it was okay. I told myself he'd understand one day. But 1 year became 2, then 3. And the gifts, they got bigger. A Lego castle that cost as much as a weekend getaway. A full VR setup he barely touched. 1 year I bought him front row tickets to an NBA game. I was so proud when I hit purchase. He opened the envelope, read the card, and said, "Cool." Then he slid it under a stack of homework and walked away. I laughed it off. He's getting older. Kids are moody. Julia didn't say much. She just cleared the table like she'd done every birthday. One time I asked Ethan, "Did you like the drone I got you?" He shrugged. "Haven't tried it yet. It's still in the box." It hit me sideways. This was the same kid who used to light up when I brought home a keychain from the airport. Now he didn't even open the packages right away. I told myself I just had to try harder, work harder, get him something cooler. I upgraded to a PS5 with all the extras. Then the new iPad. Then a gaming chair still in its plastic wrap weeks later. The more he pulled away, the more I tried to fill the gap with things. Shiny, expensive, guilt-wrapped things. I remember one Christmas, Julia set up everything beautifully. The tree lit the cookies fresh out of the oven. I arrived late, blamed a client call that ran long, even though I could have left earlier. Ethan had already unwrapped most of his gifts. When I handed him the last box, a state-of-the-art gaming laptop, he looked up and asked, "Do you want to watch me open it? Or are you going to leave in 5 minutes?" I laughed awkwardly. Of course I'm staying, but he didn't smile. He just opened the box silently and plugged it in. That night, Julia asked, "Do you even remember what you got him last year?" I paused. I couldn't. "But I'm here now," I said. "Isn't that what counts?" She nodded slowly. "Sure. Now." I didn't see the shift happening. It wasn't some dramatic explosion. It was slow. Like a tide pulling away so gradually you don't notice you're stranded until the water's gone. And every time I noticed Ethan acting distant, I blamed his age, his hormones, his teachers. Anything but me. I convinced myself I was a good father because I provided, because our fridge was full and his tuition was prepaid. But deep down, a part of me knew I was building a kingdom and forgetting the prince. By the time I turned 45, the company was valued at $120 million. We'd just closed a Series C round with two of the biggest VCs in the valley, and my face started appearing in magazines I used to read at airport lounges. Forbes called me one of the top 10 self-made disruptors under 50. CNBC wanted a sit-down interview. TEDx sent an invite to headline a conference in Boston titled "The Price of Ambition." The irony escaped me at the time. I wore a navy suit that morning, freshly tailored, paired with a Rolex I had bought to celebrate our last funding milestone. I stood backstage sipping a matcha latte and reviewing notes I didn't need. My speech was locked in, polished, crowd-tested. When they called my name, the applause was instant. I scanned the crowd and thought I spotted Julia's red scarf in the third row, and Ethan, taller than I remembered, his hair slightly overgrown, sitting beside her. My chest swelled. Finally, they were here. They would see what I built, what I sacrificed for them. Surely they'd understand now. I started strong, talked about grit, late nights, early failures. The audience laughed when I wanted them to, nodded in all the right places. Cameras rolled. Twitter buzzed. Then came the moment, the line I thought would seal my reputation as bold, unapologetic, iconoclastic. I said, smiling, "If you want to build something legendary, learn to silence distractions. That includes your phone, especially when your spouse is calling during crunch time." The audience chuckled. Some clapped. One guy even whistled. But I saw Julia freeze. And Ethan. Ethan turned to her with something like confusion, then disappointment. They got up halfway through the applause and walked out. I hesitated for half a second. My mouth kept moving. My hands gestured as rehearsed, but everything inside me cracked. After the speech, I was swarmed. Journalists wanted quotes. Startups wanted mentorship. Investors handed me business cards. Someone said my marriage joke was savage and real. I laughed weakly and scanned the hallway, hoping Julia was waiting just outside. She wasn't. That night, the speech went viral. The clip of my quote, "Learn to silence your spouse if you want to succeed," got reshared thousands of times. Entrepreneurs reposted it. Hustle culture ate it up. But at home, silence wasn't power. It was punishment. When I walked through the front door, Julia was on the couch, laptop in her lap, her red scarf draped beside her. Ethan wasn't home. He'd gone to a friend's house. "You saw the speech?" I asked, forcing a grin. She didn't look up. I did. "It was a joke," I said. "You know that, right? It was just stage banter." She closed the laptop, finally looking at me. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. "Do you remember what you said in our wedding vows?" she asked. I blinked. "Of course I do." "Then repeat it." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I remembered the tone of that day, the sunshine, the breeze through her hair. But the exact words I said, "I'd always put you first," I guessed. She nodded. "You said, If I ever have to choose between the world and you, I'll choose you every single time. The words came back to me like a punch to the stomach. I didn't mean today's speech, I started. She raised a hand. It's not just today, Daniel. It's been years. You've chosen the world, over and over again. I didn't argue, because I couldn't. That night I lay in bed alone while she slept in Ethan's room. My phone buzzed non-stop, media requests, podcast, invites, messages from people who thought I'd nailed it. But in the quiet of that room I felt more alone than I'd ever been. I had become everything I swore I'd never be: a man, applauded by strangers, and abandoned by the people who mattered. And I had no idea how to get them back. After the TEDx fallout, things didn't explode. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, no late-night ultimatums. Just quiet. Julia didn't confront me again. She simply adjusted. She became a single parent in a married home. Morning routines no longer included me. I used to be the one to pour Ethan's serial crack jokes about math class offer last-minute spelling tips. But now, by the time I stumbled downstairs with a half-buttoned shirt and coffee in hand, he was already gone. Julia had started setting 2 plates at dinner instead of 3. Mine stayed cold on the counter, covered in foil like an afterthought. I told myself she was just giving me space. But really, she was creating one without me. She handled every school form, every field trip, every stomach bug and forgotten backpack. At parent nights, teachers stopped asking about me. At social events, neighbors started referring to Julia as Ethan's mom, not Daniel's wife. The shift was subtle and devastating. Ethan changed too. He grew quieter, more guarded. He used to greet me at the door, arms flung wide. Now I got a nod. If I was lucky. One night I found him scribbling furiously at the dining table, surrounded by school papers. "Need help?" I asked. He paused. "No, I'm good." I hovered, unsure. "Are those permission slips? Want me to sign?" He hesitated just for a second, then slid one toward me. I signed it and returned to my laptop, feeling vaguely proud that he still came to me for something. A week later, Julia called me into the kitchen. She held up a school letter. My name was signed at the bottom. The problem, I hadn't signed that one. I frowned. That's not my handwriting. Julia looked exhausted, her voice flat. Ethan forged it. I blinked. Why would he? Because he didn't want his teacher calling you. He didn't want to bother you. It landed like a stone in my stomach. He forged his own father's signature, she said softly. Because asking for your attention felt harder than faking it. I wanted to yell, to say I would talk to him, ground him, fix it. But I didn't. I just stood there, suddenly aware of how little I knew about my own son. We agreed to bring in a counselor. Ethan didn't resist. He just shrugged when we suggested it, like it didn't matter either way. After a few sessions, the psychologist sat us down. She was gentle but direct. Ethan exhibits signs of social withdrawal. Not clinical depression, but he's internalizing isolation. He's highly functional, but emotionally unanchored. What does that mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It means he feels unseen. Not unloved, he knows you love him. But he doesn't feel known. She looked at me then. He craves presence, not provision. Julia's hand tightened on her lap, knuckles white. She didn't speak. I wanted her to say something, anything. Instead, she nodded once. She'd known this all along. That night, I knocked on Ethan's bedroom door. He was at his desk, headphones on, watching a video on climate change. His walls were covered with posters not of games or sports, but ocean reefs, endangered species, solar panels. I hadn't bought a single one of them. I hadn't even known he cared about those things. "Can I sit?" I asked. He shrugged. I sat anyway. I saw what you're working on. It's cool." He didn't answer. Do you like science?" Still silence. Then softly, "I entered a science fair last year. You were supposed to be the guest speaker." I remembered the invitation vaguely. I'd sent a gift basket to the organizers, said I was traveling. "I'm sorry," I said. I didn't know it meant that much. He looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "You never asked." That cut deeper than any outburst could have. Because he was right. I had become so good at explaining, promising, rationalizing, I forgot to simply ask. About his life, his interests, his world. I left his room that night feeling like a stranger in my own house. Julia was reading on the couch, glasses low on her nose. I sat beside her, not speaking. After a moment, she said, "He still needs you, but not like this." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The adaptation wasn't just theirs. It was mine, too. I had adapted to absence, and now I had to unlearn it before it calcified into something permanent. There was a letter on my desk. It was handwritten, folded neatly in thirds, resting beside my laptop like something sacred or dangerous. Julia's handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, controlled. I recognized the way she looped her "why" as. It took me back to the notes she used to leave in my coat pocket during our early years. I opened it without hesitation, half expecting an apology, or maybe an invitation to try again. But the first line stopped me. "If you're still reading it means you still care. If not, this will just sit here like everything else I've tried." I paused. My phone buzzed with a Slack notification. Quarterly review edits. The team was waiting on feedback. A client was flying in tomorrow. A reporter had emailed twice. I folded the letter back up and slid it into the bottom drawer. I told myself I'd read it later, maybe after the meeting or the next one. Later when things calmed down. Later when I had time to focus. Later never came. That same week, I was in a boardroom at our downtown office discussing crisis communication strategies when my head of PR knocked on the glass door, face pale. "We're getting media pings about a rumor," she said quietly. "What kind of rumor?" "It's about your son. Something about a school suspension." I blinked. "Suspension, Ethan." She handed me a printed email thread from our brand monitoring service. Some parent at his school posted on a community board said your son got into a fight. I stared at the page, the words blurring. Before I could respond, she added, "We've already flagged it as unverified and coordinated a takedown. Our statement says the claim is false and malicious. We're protecting your reputation." I nodded numb. "Good. Thank you." It wasn't until that night at home that I asked Julia about it. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from the dishes. "He punched a kid in the cafeteria," she said calmly. 3 days ago, what I felt my pulse rise. "Why didn't anyone tell me I called?" she said. "Left you a voicemail. Twice. I stopped. Checked my phone. There it was. Missed calls. Voicemails I hadn't opened." "What happened?" I asked. "He hit the boy because the kid called you a ghost. Said you were just an ATM with legs." My knees gave out slightly. I leaned against the counter. Julia finally looked at me. Her face wasn't angry. It was blank. "The school suspended him. I met with the principal. He's on probation." I handled it. I tried to form words, something about how I should have been told, how I should have been there. but she beat me to it. You were busy, she said. The next morning, I listened to Ethan's voicemail. It was short. Hey, I guess I'm in trouble. I'm okay. Just whatever. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I played the message 3 times. That's how far we'd fallen, my son was. In a physical altercation, disciplined by his school, and all he could say was, "Don't worry about it," because he assumed I wouldn't. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out Julia's letter. I read the first few lines again. If you're still reading it, means you still care. But the second paragraph, the one I had never gotten to, hit me like a freight train. I stopped expecting you to show up a long time ago. Ethan stopped asking for you even earlier. But here's the thing you need to understand: absence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you unforgettable in the worst ways. He remembers every time you weren't there. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. How had I missed all the signs, the fake signatures, the skipped dinners, the science fair speech he prepared without telling me? And now this, defending me the only way he knew how, with his fists. And I hadn't even known. The PR team had spun the story. The internet had buried it. My brand had been protected. But my son... He had been left to stand in the middle of a cafeteria, mocked for having a father too absent to exist. And I had done nothing. I had been too busy crafting statements, managing perceptions, building a legacy. But legacy meant nothing if the people it was meant to impress were the ones hurting most. That night I sat outside Ethan's room, listening through the door as he played music, soft, wordless, drifting. I wanted to knock, to talk, to explain. But what could I say? Sorry for missing your suspension sounded pathetic. I care, I swear, would have rung hollow. So I stayed outside. Just sat there. Because being present, even silently, felt better than doing nothing. Inside, the music kept playing. I didn't recognize the song. I didn't know who the artist was. Because I didn't know my son anymore. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, formal, the kind that carried weight beyond its paper. It sat on the kitchen table next to Julia's half-finished tea. She didn't say a word when I walked in, just nodded toward it, then returned to chopping vegetables as if it were a grocery list. I picked it up slowly, already guessing. It was exactly what I feared: divorce papers. Everything felt heavier in that moment. The air, the silence, even my heartbeat. I flipped through the pages, cold, clinical outlines of asset division, visitation schedules, custody clauses. Ethan's name appeared more times than mine. I haven't signed, Julia said, her back still to me. Not yet. I stared at her. Then why give it to me? Because I'm tired of waiting for something to change, she said, finally turning around. And I need you to know how close we are to done. She wasn't angry. There was no rage in her voice, just exhaustion. That was worse. I tried to speak, to form some defense, but all I managed was, This doesn't have to be final. Julia shook her head. Then show me it's not. She didn't say how, she didn't say when, just left it there like a fuse waiting to be lit. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to Ethan's room. He was at his desk, scribbling something furiously. I knocked. He turned, surprised. What's up? I hesitated. Just checking in. How's school? He shrugged. Fine. Anything you're working on, Hayin? He gestured to the notebook. Essay for English. What's the topic, my hero? I smiled. That's a classic. Who'd you pick? He didn't answer right away. Just looked down, fiddled with his pen. Mom, he said finally. I nodded, forcing a smile. She deserves that. He turned back to the page and I stood there waiting, hoping for a but, or even just my name in passing. It never came. I wrote about how she's always there, he said, eyes still on the paper. How she makes things okay even when they're not. How she never quits. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger, just honesty. Sounds like a great essay, I said quietly. Yeah, he muttered. She is. I left the room without another word. In the hallway, I paused. On the wall were photos Julia had arranged baby Ethan first day of kindergarten science fair ribbons. In each one, Ethan was smiling Julia by his side. I wasn't in a single photo past 2015. Later that week, I got an email from his teacher. She'd attached the essay, said it was one of the most moving pieces she'd read that year. I opened it, bracing myself. It was beautiful, thoughtful, raw. And I wasn't mentioned once. Not even a passing sentence. Not a shared memory. Nothing. My son had written a full-page tribute to heroism and had erased me entirely from the narrative. I couldn't blame him. Still, it crushed me. I printed the essay, folded it, and slipped it into my briefcase. I carried it with me to meetings, dinners, flights like a wound that wouldn't scab over. One night, after a long day of pretending to be functional, I sat alone in the den. The TV was on mute. My laptop buzzed with emails I ignored. I pulled out the essay again, read it, then read it again. Every sentence about Julia rang true. Every paragraph felt like proof that she'd done this parenting thing alone, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. I'd been a ghost in our story. And worse, I hadn't even realized I'd died in it. The worst part wasn't losing them. It was that they'd already learned how to live without me. And I was still here, breathing, working, achieving, thinking it all meant something. But achievements don't hug you back. Success doesn't come to your graduation. Money doesn't write you into essays. I folded the paper carefully, placed it back in my briefcase, and sat there in the dark for a long time. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Like I'd already moved out. And no one noticed. It was supposed to be a landmark day. We were finalizing a contract that would double the company's valuation overnight, a strategic partnership worth over $40 million in long-term projections. I had flown to Chicago the night before, reviewed every clause twice, and rehearsed my pitch until 2 a.m. At 10:15 a.m., I was sitting in a sleek glass conference room overlooking the skyline, dressed in my best charcoal suit, fingers curled around a Mont Blanc pen. That's when my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then again. I glanced down. Julia. I silenced it. Just 5 more minutes, I told myself. It buzzed again. This time a text appeared. I caught only the preview before it disappeared. Call me now. It's Ethan. I should have excused myself. Should have stood up, walked out, done something. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward, signed the deal, shook hands, posed for a photo. By 10:47, it was done. By 10:48, I was calling Julia. She didn't answer the first time, or the second. The third time, she picked up. Her voice was shaking. Where the hell have you been? My blood ran cold. What happened? There was an accident. A car hit him near the school. He's in surgery. I couldn't speak. You didn't pick up. They asked for his father. I told them. I told them to try you. They tried 5 times. I was already out of the building jacket, forgotten on the back of a leather chair. The flight back was a blur. I don't remember the cab ride. I barely remember running through the hospital corridor, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. Julia was sitting outside the ICU, face pale, hair tied back hastily. She looked up and shook her head before I could ask. He's stable. They stopped the bleeding. But there was a concussion. They're monitoring him. I sank into the chair beside her, hands trembling. Does he know what happened? They said he's disoriented. Doesn't remember much. Hours passed. Eventually, a nurse waved us in. Ethan lay there, pale tubes in his arms, a small bandage over his brow. Machines beeped softly. He stirred as we approached. Julia touched his hand. Hey, sweetheart. We're here. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, then at me. Then he asked Mom. Who's that man? Silence. My heart stopped. He didn't say it with malice. There was no anger in his voice, just confusion. Honest, childlike confusion. Julia froze. It's Dad, she whispered. That's your dad. He blinked slowly. Said nothing. I took a step back. That moment, those 6 words hit harder than anything life had ever thrown at me. Harder than poverty, rejection, betrayal. Harder than losing friends, investors, deals. Because I realized my son had erased me not out of spite, but out of absence. I had been so invisible, so irrelevant in his day-to-day world, that when his brain scrambled for safety, I didn't register, not even as a memory. The nurse gently ushered us out, saying he needed rest. I stood outside the room, staring at the door. All the flights I had taken. All the panels I'd spoken on. All the late nights, all the sacrifices I thought I was doing it for him. But the one thing he needed, my presence, I had never given. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood there feeling like a fraud in a father's suit. And for the first time, I wondered if I had already lost the one thing I was still pretending to fight for. We got home from the hospital just after midnight. Ethan had been moved to recovery, stable, resting. The doctor said he'd be okay physically. They didn't say anything about the rest. The house was dark. Julia went straight to the bedroom. I followed, unsure why. Maybe hoping for something, comfort, direction, punishment. Anything. She was packing. Neatly. Methodically. A small suitcase, not everything. Just enough. Where are you going? I asked, my voice dry. She didn't answer right away. Folded a sweater, closed a drawer. I'll be at my sister's. Ethan needs space. So do I. I stepped into the doorway, blocking the frame. Julia, wait. Please. She looked up at me, then finally. Her eyes were calm. No tears. No anger. Just emptiness. I'm not going to scream, she said. I'm too tired. I swallowed hard. He didn't recognize me. I know, I wasn't there. You haven't been there for a long time. I nodded slowly, absorbing it like a bruise spreading under skin. Then she said, What color are his eyes? I blinked. What? Ethan, she said. Your son. What color are his eyes? It felt like a trick question. I searched my brain. Green, I said, certain. Her mouth barely moved, but her eyes told me everything. They're blue, she said softly. Like mine. I opened my mouth, closed it. She turned back to the suitcase. I don't care that you missed birthdays, she said. I don't care about the iPads or the missed calls or the gifts you never wrapped. I could live with all of that. But you don't even know his eyes. I do. I started, but the words cracked apart before they left. No, she said, folding one last shirt. You know his blood type, his GPA, his college fund. You know the numbers. But you don't know the boy. She zipped the suitcase, slowly stood up, and walked past me. I didn't move. "I'll bring him back when he's ready," she added, pausing at the front door. "But he needs someone who sees him, not someone who manages him like a client." Julia. She didn't turn around. "Sleep in his room," she said. "Maybe look at the posters on the wall. Learn something." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there in the silence, the weight of her words crashing down like bricks. I looked around the house, our house, and realized I didn't recognize half of it. On the fridge were drawings I'd never seen, notes in Julia's handwriting, photos with just the two of them, pumpkin patches, beach walks, science fairs. I wandered into Ethan's room, sat on the edge of his bed. It smelled faintly of his shampoo, a citrus blend I'd never noticed before. I looked at the posters. Climate change, SpaceX, marine biology. All interests I'd never asked about. His desk was cluttered with sketchbooks, half-built models, and a framed photo of him and Julia at a museum. I wasn't in it. The silence grew louder by the second. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was worse. It was absence turned permanent. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through pictures. There were hundreds from work events, galas, conferences, smiling faces, applause, flashbulbs, very few of Ethan, fewer of us together. I finally found one, him at 4 years old, on my lap. We were laughing. I had forgotten that photo even existed, forgotten the sound of that laugh. And now I couldn't even remember the eyes behind it. That night I slept in Ethan's bed, fully clothed. I stared at the ceiling for hours, guilt pressing down on my chest, like weight I couldn't lift. Not because Julia had left, but because she had every right to, and because I knew deep down she wasn't the one who had disappeared. I was. The house was too quiet. No sounds from the kitchen, no footsteps in the hallway, no muffled music from Ethan's room. Just silence, sharp, echoing, and inescapable. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the remains of a life I thought I was building. Framed photos on the wall, most of them missing me. A bookshelf I hadn't touched in years. A fireplace I never sat beside. I picked up the remote and turned on the TV, not for entertainment, but as a distraction from the silence. Instead, the screen lit up with the last thing I expected, a folder labeled Ethan's Early Years. Julia must have left the USB plugged in. I hesitated, then clicked it open. The first video began to play. Ethan, maybe 1.5, taking his first steps across the living room carpet. Julia behind him, arms outstretched, beaming. He wobbled, then fell on his bottom, looking up. The camera zoomed in on his tiny face, scanning the room, expecting someone. He searched, eyes darting, but I wasn't there. I watched 5 more clips. First haircut. First time on a bike. Kindergarten graduation. Each one filled with laughter, clapping, kisses from Julia. And each one missing my voice, missing my shadow, missing me. I told myself I was working, providing, preparing, but those words sounded thinner with every frame I watched. Halfway through a birthday video, maybe his 7th, I paused. There on the screen was a pile of gifts, towers of them, labeled, wrapped, stacked perfectly. And there I was, finally entering the frame, late phone in one hand, Bluetooth in the other. I handed Ethan a box the size of a microwave. He said thank you, quietly, politely, then turned back to Julia to open it. I remembered that gift. It was a drone, the top-rated model that year. I had picked it after reading a dozen reviews, had it express shipped from Tokyo. I remembered the price, the specs, the brand, but I couldn't remember if he ever flew it. That realization hit harder than any argument Julia could have made. I couldn't remember a single moment of Ethan's real childhood. Not the time he learned to swim, not the subject he struggled with most in school, not his favorite movie, not what made him laugh uncontrollably. But I could list every gift I had ever bought him. Model numbers, release dates, receipt totals. That was my version of fatherhood, a spreadsheet of purchases, a ledger of guilt. I leaned back on the couch, letting the next video autoplay. It was Christmas. Julia filmed from the couch while Ethan played with a new Lego set. In the background, I sat at the dining table laptop, open typing. Ethan turned around and said, "Dad, look, I didn't look." He said it again. I gave a thumbs up without turning away from the screen. I had no memory of that moment, but Ethan probably did. Not because it was special, but because it had become normal. I closed the folder, turned off the TV, and sat in the dark, completely still. And for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not the kind of tears you shed after a long day or a failed deal. These were deep from somewhere primal grief. For a time I could never get back for a version of myself I had betrayed. For a boy who had waited, and waited, and finally stopped waiting. I sat there for hours, the house cold and silent until morning began to bleed through the windows. I thought about the letter Julia had written, about the look in her eyes when she asked about Ethan's. I thought about the moment in the hospital when my son had stared at me like I was a stranger. And I knew this was the end of something. But maybe, just maybe, it could also be the beginning of something else. If I had the courage to start over, not as the provider, not as the breadwinner, not as the brand, but as a father, a real one. Monday morning, I walked into the corner office I had spent the better part of 2 decades building. Framed awards lined the wall. A mahogany desk sat in the middle like a throne. Assistants buzzed outside my glass door. I didn't sit down. I typed out a short email. Subject, stepping down. 2 lines. No explanation. No flourish. By noon, it was done. The company was mine, but the life it came with was no longer worth owning. I ignored the dozens of calls that came pouring in. By 3 p.m., I was pulling into the school parking lot, the first time I'd done so without Julia beside me or Ethan in the back seat. It felt surreal. The last time I had been on campus, Ethan was in kindergarten. I had walked him to class on the first day, kissed the top of his head, and told myself I'd always be there. Then I got busy, and somehow always became eventually, and eventually became never. I walked through the front doors and into a room labeled Parent-Teacher Conferences. Rows of chairs lined the walls. Clipboards sat on a long table with printed schedules. A teacher glanced up and smiled politely. "Hi there. You here for Ethan Reeves?" "Yes," I said. She flipped through her folder, paused, then frowned slightly. "And you are?" I hesitated. "His father." Her smile froze for a second. "Oh, sorry, I've only ever met his mom. I thought maybe you were his uncle." The words stung, but I nodded. Understandable. She led me into a smaller room where a woman in a cardigan sat behind a desk, flipping through notes. "Ms. Hampton, 8th grade homeroom." She looked up, startled. "Mr. Reeves, it's good to finally meet you." I sat unsure of where to put my hands. She began with pleasantries, his grades, his attendance, nothing surprising. Then she opened a new folder thicker than the rest. "This is something I usually go over at the end of the year," she said. "But I think you should see it now." It was a behavior report, not a disciplinary one, quite the opposite. She read aloud. Ethan was the first to comfort a classmate who came out as transgender. He stood up to a bully in October, took a detention for it. He started a peer tutoring group on his own initiative. Donated his allowance to the school food drive anonymously, but we found out. I stared at her. She smiled gently. He's a remarkable young man. The kind who notices when someone feels invisible. My throat tightened. He doesn't talk about you much, she added. But when he does, it's never with bitterness. Just distance. Like you're someone from a story he used to know. I looked down at the report. Bullet points of kindness, moments of courage, things I hadn't taught him, things he had learned in spite of me. I swallowed hard. He never mentioned these things. She nodded. He's quiet about praise. Doesn't need attention. Just does what's right. I felt something crack deep inside. Not guilt this time, or at least not only guilt. Pride, too. A swelling, aching pride I didn't know where to put. He's good, I said softly. He is, she agreed. Very good. The meeting ended, and I walked slowly back through the school halls, passing faded posters and squeaky lockers. I imagined him here defending kids who couldn't defend themselves, helping others in silence, becoming a person I barely recognized. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel. All that time I thought I was building a future for him. But he'd been building himself. Alone. And he had turned into someone extraordinary. I wasn't his architect. I wasn't even his witness. But I could still try, maybe for the first real time, to be present in what came next. I started the engine, drove home, and for the first time in years, I didn't take a single work call on the way. I got home before sunset for the first time in years. No meetings, no conference calls, no inbox screaming for attention. Just the hum of silence as I stood in the doorway holding nothing but the weight of the day. Julia was in the kitchen stirring something on the stove. She didn't turn when I walked in. I went to the parent-teacher meeting, I said. She nodded. I know. Ms. Hampton texted me. She said Ethan's one of the most compassionate kids in the school. I could have told you that, she said, without sarcasm, without pride, just fact. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. She turned down the heat and finally faced me. Why now? Daniel, I quit the company. That made her blink. Walked away from everything I added. Contracts, clients. All of it. She stared as if trying to see if I meant it, or if this was just another dramatic gesture on a guilt high. I didn't say more. I didn't plead or perform. I just stood there hoping something in my silence said what my words couldn't. That night, we sat across from each other at the dinner table, Ethan between us. He said nothing, ate slowly, kept his eyes on his plate. I heard about the food drive, I said. He shrugged. It wasn't a big deal, I think it was. No reply. Ms. Hampton said you helped a kid who got bullied. That takes guts. He sipped his water. I'm proud of you. He looked up for a split second. Okay. That was it. I didn't expect a hug or tears, but I hadn't expected indifference either. That stung more than anger. Later that night, Julia handed me a small envelope yellowed around the edges. I found this cleaning out Ethan's old art bin. I took it. My name was scrawled across the front in crooked 9-year-old handwriting. Dad. I never gave it to you, Julia said. He wrote it years ago. I kept it thinking I'd wait for the right moment. Then I told myself you were too busy. Then I just forgot. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The letter was simple. misspelled, pure. Dear Dad, I miss you. I saw a movie where a dad came to his kid's soccer game even when he was sick. That was cool. I hope one day you come to my game too. I got a goal last week. Mom said you were working, but that's okay. Maybe next time. I love you even if you're busy. Love, Ethan. I read it twice, then 3 more times. It felt like a time capsule buried in guilt. A small voice from a boy who still believed I might show up. I couldn't breathe. I looked at Julia. Why didn't I get this? You were never around long enough to read it, she said. And part of me didn't want to give him false hope. I nodded slowly, eyes stinging. Does he remember writing it? I don't know, she said. Maybe. Maybe not. I stayed up that night staring at the letter, running my fingers over the creases. What would have happened if I'd read it then? Would I have left the office early, shown up to a soccer game, noticed the color of his eyes? Would I have become the man I was trying to become now, 5 years too late? The next morning, I made Ethan breakfast. Pancakes, his favorite, even though I wasn't sure if it still was. He came down in his uniform, paused at the table and looked at the plate. I thought Mom made these, he said. I did. He sat carefully. I found the letter, I said. He looked at me. What letter? From when you were 9. You wrote about wanting me to come to your soccer game. His ears turned pink. I read it last night. I should have read it years ago. I should have come to every game. He didn't speak. I'm not asking for anything, I said. Just, I wanted you to know I finally heard you. He nodded once, then took a bite. Still like pancakes? I asked. They're okay. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't a wall either. Progress, even if only an inch. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first inch of a long uphill road. It started with small things. Eggs over easy. A packed lunch. A ride to school. They weren't grand gestures, no big announcements or dramatic apologies. Just quiet consistency. The kind of presence that didn't ask to be noticed. Ethan didn't warm up right away. He didn't laugh at my old jokes, didn't start spilling stories about his day. But he stopped avoiding eye contact. He stopped disappearing into his room the second he walked through the door. Sometimes he even lingered. I began showing up at school events, not as a speaker or a donor, just a dad. I sat in the second row at the spring concert, applauded too loud at a math competition, signed up to help chaperone the 8th grade field trip to the Science Museum. At first, the other parents gave me strange looks, some even whispered, but the teachers began nodding. The front desk started to remember my name. I signed in. I showed up. Again and again. At home, I helped Ethan with his biology project, a model of a coral reef made from recycled materials. I had no idea he cared so deeply about marine life. I spent 2 hours researching with him, printing images, buying the right glue. One night while we were cutting out miniature fish, I asked him, why the ocean? He shrugged. It's disappearing. I nodded, not just at the fact, but at the boy saying it. He looked at me. Kinda like you did. The words weren't sharp, just honest. A soft observation from someone who'd grown used to watching things vanish. I'm trying to come back, I said. He didn't reply. But he handed me the scissors, and we kept building the reef together. Julia watched all of this with quiet caution. She didn't move back in right away, didn't undo the decision she had made to separate our lives. But she softened. She spoke to me without rehearsed tension. She let me take more space and more responsibility. One evening, she walked into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and said, "He asked me if you were staying this time." I turned off the water. "What did you say?" I said. "I don't know. But it seems like maybe you are." I nodded. "I am." She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. Weeks passed, then months. Ethan's graduation came faster than I expected. Middle school done, high school looming. He was taller now, more composed, his voice deeper. But when he stepped onto the stage in his cap and gown, he still looked like that little boy who once wrote me a letter begging me to show up. And this time I was there, camera in hand, flowers in the passenger seat, tears dangerously close. Toward the end of the ceremony, they announced a surprise. A student had made a short tribute video for the class. It started with laughter, candid photos, memories set to music. Then the screen faded to black, and Ethan appeared. He stood in front of a white wall wearing a navy shirt, hands in his pockets. His voice came through the speakers steady. "I want to dedicate this to someone I didn't expect to." People leaned in. For most of my life, I didn't really know my dad. He was somewhere else. I don't have many memories of him growing up. He wasn't at most games or recitals. I used to wonder if that would ever change. I held my breath. Then this year, it did. The screen cut to clips Ethan and I at the Science Museum laughing while painting his coral reef, me sitting in the school cafeteria during career day. Now I have new memories. I have someone who makes pancakes, who asks questions, who doesn't just show up but stays. His voice wavered slightly. I don't remember my dad in the past, but I'll remember him now. I'll remember this version of him. And I'm glad this version came back before I stopped waiting. The room was silent. I sat frozen. Julia reached over and took my hand, for the first time in years. When the lights came up, Ethan returned to his seat without looking at me. I found him outside afterward near the edge of the lawn. "Hey," I said. He turned. "That video." I started, but my voice cracked. He gave a half smile. I meant it. I nodded, tried to speak, couldn't. He stepped forward and hugged me, not awkwardly, not out of obligation. He held on, and I broke. Right there in front of everyone, I held my son and cried like a man being let back into a story he thought was already over. Because sometimes it's not too late. Sometimes the version of you they need is the one who finally learned how to stay. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window as I flipped pancakes, not because it was a special occasion, but because it had become our routine. Julia sipped coffee at the counter, still in her robe, while Ethan packed his backpack, humming something under his breath. The house, once filled with silence and tension, now breathed with warmth. We were back under the same roof. Not because anyone forced it, but because healing had made space for us to return. Slowly, carefully, piece by piece, we had rebuilt the home we'd once lost. I no longer wore suits. I didn't rush emails before breakfast or dial into meetings mid-conversation. After stepping down from the company, I took on a few mentoring gigs, advising young entrepreneurs via Zoom calls from the home office. Nothing too demanding, just enough to stay sharp while keeping my priorities intact. Now I lived in the rhythm of family. Evenings were for home-cooked dinners. Saturdays meant Ethan and I tackled weekend projects or school prep. Julia and I found our way back to conversations, real ones, about books, travel, and occasionally dreams we'd once put on hold. Ethan thrived. One afternoon, we received a thick envelope in the mail. He opened it cautiously, then let out a soft, stunned laugh. "Full ride," he said, eyes wide. "Environmental science." They accepted me. Julia clapped her hands. I pulled him into a hug. He didn't pull away. "What's the school?" I asked. He handed me the letter. It wasn't an Ivy. It wasn't across the country. It was a respected university 30 minutes from home. "You sure you don't want to go farther?" I asked. "Explore." He shrugged, a little smile tugging at his mouth. I did think about it. But honestly, I don't want to leave again. Not yet. Not after finally having this. I looked at him, taller now, wiser still, carrying that quiet strength. My chest tightened. He wasn't afraid to leave. He was choosing to stay. Not because of fear, but because of love. That night I sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the trees, Ethan's acceptance letter in my lap. I had chased the world once, fortune, recognition, validation. But this quiet moment with a full heart, a full table, and a family that knew they came first. This was success. No headlines, no applause, just presence, consistency, love that didn't need proof, only showing up. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for something more, because everything I needed was already here. The mic blinked red as the host signaled we were live. Across from me sat a young interviewer, mid-30s, brimming with enthusiasm. He introduced me with reverence, former tech executive, startup mentor, father of one. A success story, they called it. But that wasn't the story I came to tell. So Daniel, the host, began, "You've built companies, mentored dozens of founders. What's been the most valuable lesson you've learned?" I looked into the glass pane of the studio, my reflection older, quieter than the man I once was. "There's a lot I've learned about business," I said. "But the lesson that matters most has nothing to do with revenue or innovation." The host leaned in. "I used to be the most successful father in the boardroom," I continued, "but the biggest failure in my own living room." There was silence. I missed birthdays, school plays. I thought sending the newest gadgets would fill the gap. iPads, drones, VR headsets, I bought it all. But none of that mattered when my son looked at me one day and didn't recognize who I was. The host nodded quietly. "I remember sitting alone watching old videos," I said. "In one, my son was taking his first steps. He fell, looked around, searching for someone to pick him up. He found his mother, not me. I wasn't there. I couldn't remember being in any of those moments because I wasn't." A pause. Deep breath. I remember thinking, I know every product I ever bought him. But I didn't know his favorite subject, his fears, the sound of his laugh when he was 7. I leaned forward slightly, voice steady. Eventually, I left it all behind. The meetings, the titles, the spotlight. I became a dad again, for real this time. I started cooking breakfast, sitting at the back of classrooms, showing up. "And what changed?" the host asked softly. "Everything," I said. He let me back in slowly. He didn't need me to be perfect. He just needed me to be there. The host gave me a moment, then asked, "What would you say to a father listening right now? Someone caught up in the hustle, thinking they're doing it for their family." I looked straight into the mic, picturing the fathers out there like I once was. I'd say this: don't wait until your kid asks someone else who you are. Don't let them grow up remembering the devices you gave them more than the look in your eyes when they spoke. Presence beats presence every time. The red light on the mic faded. The interview ended. The host reached across and shook my hand. "That was powerful," he said. "Thank you." On the way home, I stopped by Ethan's favorite sandwich shop. He was waiting at the kitchen table when I walked in, headphones around his neck, tapping his pencil to a beat only he heard. podcast go okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, placing the food on the table. "Told them about you." He raised an eyebrow. "The good parts, I hope." I chuckled. "All of it, especially the parts I had to learn the hard way." He smiled, unwrapped his sandwich. "Well, they're lucky to hear it now. We ate together, no rush, no distractions. Just conversation stories, questions, moments shared." Later that night, I walked past his room and saw the door cracked open. Inside, Ethan was sketching something on his tablet, a design for a sustainability app he was developing for a school project. He didn't see me at first. I stood there for a moment watching. He looked up. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking how proud I am." He smiled again, not the polite kind, the real kind. And just like that, I knew. The legacy I left wouldn't be a company. It wouldn't be stock options or keynote speeches. It would be this, a boy who felt seen, a home filled with second chances, and a story that for once ended where it mattered most together.